It's the evening of October 11th, 2018, and I wanted to come to present what might be a very significant dealing with the deal of the century that Donald Trump was going to present. I wanted to first read to you a little segment out of an article on several news channels. It says, there are growing signs Netanyahu may soon call for early elections, possibly as early as next week, when Parliament reconvenes from its summer break. And though Netanyahu hasn't committed yet, conditions appear ripe for him to schedule the vote nearly a year ahead of schedule. Now, why is this so significant? It has to do with a statement that is made by the INSS, one of the leaders, of the authors of this peace agreement. But I'm just going to read you what he said. He said that after the midterm elections in the U.S. and after the Israeli elections in 2019, this will be the plan, the peace plan that they're proposing, that a responsible Israeli leader will take and implement. So suddenly we have on October 11th this statement that Netanyahu might call for early elections. This is the article I want to read a little bit from. New peace plan created behind the scenes. Institute for National Security Studies, otherwise known as the INSS, presents plan which creates Palestinian state with or without Palestinian authorities' consent. This is from Arut Shiva on October 6, 2018. Israel's Institute for National Security Studies, INSS, is presenting a new peace plan. For the past 2 years, the Institute has worked with all those who were involved in previous Israeli-Arab negotiations. A Channel 2 report said former IDF chiefs and staff Benny Gantz and Gabi Ashkenazi were involved, and that the plan has already been presented to Arab leaders as well as to the White House and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Under the plan, Israel would use the security fence as a separation line and redivide Judea and Samaria. 65% of Judea and Samaria would be allocated for a Palestinian state, and the rest, including the settlement blocks and Jerusalem's Jewish neighborhoods, would remain in Israeli hands, and building there would be unobstructed. Building in more isolated settlements would be frozen in order to allow for future negotiations. The Jordan Valley would remain under Israeli security control, and the IDF would retain operational freedom in Judea and Samaria. No towns would be evacuated at this point, and Israel would push the international community to bolster the Palestinian Authority economy. At this point, Jerusalem and Gaza would not be on the table, and the Palestinian Authority's agreement is not required. If the PA does not agree, Israel will push the plan forward on its own with international backing. According to the INSS director Amos Yadlin, he's one of the authors of the peace plan, said this is the only plan which could succeed, and Israel will almost certainly adopt it after the election next year. So it's going to be adopted after the election. Now Netanyahu is calling for early elections. The state of Israel doesn't have a diplomatic wazi, if that's how you pronounce W-A-Z-E, and we're offering it a diplomatic wazi, he said. We're suggesting it take a regional path. We're suggesting it take an independent path. We can move between roads according to developments, but the important thing is that you know which destination you set. Our wazi is set to a Jewish country, a democratic country, a safe country, and a moral country. We need to shape our country. If they can make a Palestinian state which can live in peace next to us, I'm in favor of that. I'm really in favor of it. But I'm not going to condition it on their agreement. I'm willing to take a chance and tell you that after the midterm elections and after the Israeli elections in 2019, this will be the plan that a responsible Israeli leader will take and implement. So thinking about what was said in this AP report, October 11th, 2018, incidentally, during the true fall equinox Feast of Trumpets, this was stated, there are growing signs that Netanyahu may soon call for early elections, possibly as early as next week. So, that's interesting he'd be calling for early elections because it's getting this ball rolling as far as the peace plan. This group that wrote the peace plan, called the INSS, they will have their 12th annual international conference on January 27th through 29th of 2019. So is that when it will take place? The proposal would split Israel from Palestinians, but don't call it a peace plan, according to this article. Amos Yadlin, one of the chief architects or authors of this peace plan, and the INSS think tank urge Israel to take independent action to remain Jewish, democratic, secure, and ethical, and prevent existential threat of binational state. This article was written by Judah Ari Gross on October 8th, 2018 at 5:51 p.m. Following 2 years of research and consultation with figures throughout the Middle East, a leading Israeli think tank on Monday presented a comprehensive plan of action to separate Israel from the Palestinians. The plan could ensure that Israel remains a Jewish, democratic, secure, and ethical state. If it acts fast enough, one of the plan's main authors, Major General Amos Yadlin, said. Now, he is the chief author of the peace plan. Major General Amos Yadlin. The primary assumption in the 121-page proposal is that Israel, through inertia and a lack of political will, is on track to becoming a binational state without a clear Jewish majority, which could mean the end of Israel either as a Jewish state or a democratic one. A major assumption of the plan is that Israel is the strongest it's ever been and that the stars have aligned to give Israel an unprecedented ability to sculpt its future. There's a window of opportunity that never existed before, Yadlin, who leads the Institute for National Security Studies, which produced the plan, said. He's with the INSS. That window of opportunity has been formed by a weakened Palestinian Authority, a lessening of antipathy toward Israel in Arab countries around the Middle East, and an American administration that is seen as supportive of Israel and that is due to present its own peace plan at some point in the future. However, Yadlin cautioned that window of opportunity could close within 2 to 6 years with the election of a different U.S. president and other geopolitical shifts around the world, so Israel should take advantage of the situation while it can. According to Yadlin, Israel has 2 existential threats on the horizon, a nuclear Iran and binational state. For the nuclear Iran threat, Israel has a strategy, but for the threat of a single state, Israel does not have a strategy, Yadlin told the Times of Israel in his office at the INSS on Tel Aviv University's campus ahead of the proposal's presentation. I'm not hysterical like former U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry saying that if we don't solve it this year or this week, there will be no other time. But I think we need to set the goal and start working toward it, he said. The INSS document called the Strategic Framework for the Israeli-Palestinian Arena takes a deliberately one-sided approach to addressing the conflict, looking solely at Israel's best interests and proposing only steps that Israel could take, regardless of the cooperation of the Palestinians. We can't wait for a Palestinian Messiah to come and make peace with us, because that won't happen. And we can't wait for the Messiah who will give us a clear Jewish majority from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. We're doing it ourselves. That's Zionism, Yadlin said. I had to interrupt the recording last night because I almost blacked out. I wasn't feeling well with my sinuses, so I couldn't get through the article. So isn't that an interesting statement? He said, we can't wait for a Palestinian Messiah, in other words, the Mahdi, to come and make peace with us, because that won't happen. And we can't wait for the Messiah, who will give us a clear Jewish majority from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. We're doing it ourselves. That's Zionism, Yadlin said. The plan ignores the Gaza Strip and looks only at the West Bank. It also does not address the issue of Jerusalem, whose eastern neighborhoods, which the Palestinians claim for their future capital, Israel refuses to give up. And they shouldn't give it up. Under the proposal, Israel would create a contiguous Palestinian entity under the control of the Palestinian Authority, comprising approximately 65% of Judea and Samaria, which they call the West Bank. Significant economic incentives would be granted to the PA, preferably from Arab nations and the international community, in order to keep it afloat by improving the lives of the so-called Palestinians. Large Israeli settlement blocks, those around Jerusalem and the central West Bank, Judea and Samaria, and the settlement city of Ariel in the north, would remain part of Israel, and building there would thus continue unobstructed. However, construction in farther flung settlements would be halted in order to leave open the option of a two-state solution, Yadlin said. The Israel Defense Forces and Shin Bet Security Service would retain unfettered access to Palestinian cities and towns in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, in order to fight terror and prevent violence. The Palestinians would also not be able to have a freestanding army or other significant military, and Israel would continue to control the airspace over the West Bank, Judea and Samaria. Israel would also maintain a presence in the Jordan Valley in order to prevent Palestinians from being able to smuggle weapons into the country through the eastern border. Asked how the Palestinians were expected to accept a situation in which they did not have the full sovereign rights of other countries, Yadlin said the INSS is meant to address how the state of Israel would look, less so how a Palestinian state would look. He acknowledged that it would, quote, by definition mean a less than state, end quote, but said the alternative was simply unacceptable to Israel. Of course, the INSS plan presupposes an Israeli government interested in advancing it, which would require compromise and change from parties across the political spectrum. The right fell in love with the status quo, the left fell in love with unachievable peace, which I'm not against. I'm very much for it, but it will never happen. So let's do what we think we can do and should do, Yadlin said. Quote, but I think that most Israelis accept my view, he added, citing a poll that found an approximately 80% majority of Israelis who support splitting from the Palestinians and approximately 60% who support a two-state solution. The authors of the study were Yadlin, who previously served as the head of military intelligence and was tapped to be the Zionist Union's defense minister in 2015, had the center-left faction won the election. Udi Dekel, a former IDF brigadier general and chief negotiator in the 2007 Annapolis Conference peace talks under then Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, and research assistant Kim Lavey, 10 other INSS fellows are acknowledged as contributors to the proposal, and dozens of outside researchers, ex-negotiators, and former defense and foreign policy officials were interviewed and assisted in the creation of the plan. They included former IDF chiefs of staff Benny Gantz and Gabi Ashkenazi, former Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon, former National Security Advisor Giora Eland, former Minister Dan Meritter, and former U.S. Ambassador to Israel Dan Shapiro. Their names do not appear on the document, nor do those of a number of other ex-officials who asked not to be named. The INSS is seen as one of Israel's premier think tanks, with numerous former high-ranking officials serving as fellows and researchers. Yadlin maintained that the plan was not connected to his or any of the other contributors' personal politics, nor, he said, were the proposals a form of advocacy. This research does not have anything to do with the fact that in 2015 I was the Zionist Union's candidate for defense minister, he said. The proposal being presented Monday is academic, investigative work. If some advocacy group or political party, or even better, the Prime Minister adopted this plan, that would be enough. But it's our job to open it up to debate for the public and for decision makers. That's what a think tank does, Yadlin said. Though it was only formally presented by the INSS on Monday, the plan has already been shown to senior government officials and the heads of the major political parties. Some of them loved it more, some of them loved it less, some of them said they would adopt it at one stage or another, he said. It was also shown to representatives of the U.S. government, Arab leaders, and Palestinian officials in order to gauge interest and receive input. When possible, Yadlin traveled directly to meet Arab officials in cases where Israelis could not freely enter the country. An American intermediary was used. And then in the article he talks about different models of the plan, but I'm going to kind of skip over some of that. He says, Yadlin said that although he's convinced that the plan will succeed in achieving that goal, he believes there's a low probability that will yield a peace agreement with the Palestinians, at least in the short term. An agreement with the Palestinians is, quote, the way of the king, he said, using a Hebrew term meaning the ideal option. But based on a deep analysis we conducted, the chances of reaching agreement are low. This will be proved, I think, when Trump presents his plan, Yadlin said, referring to a much-discussed proposal written by U.S. President Donald Trump's son-in-law and advisor Jared Kushner and the president's advisor on international negotiations, Jason Greenblatt. And Jason Greenblatt was at a meeting with these people, the INSS, so they're all working together to create this peace covenant. The U.S. administration has said that its peace proposal, billed by Trump as, quote, the deal of the century, is written and ready and will be presented in the coming months. Now I'd like to add here that they are having their international conference between January 27th through the 29th of 2019. And because Netanyahu may push the elections a year early, that could signal that this is coming sooner than later, just like the U.S. Embassy was moved to Jerusalem early. The former intelligence chief said he believes the U.S. plan, which he expects to fail, will be presented after both the U.S. midterm elections later this year and the Israeli national elections, which are currently scheduled for November 2019, but may be held sooner if the government is dissolved. Though Yadlin anticipates the failure of direct peace negotiations, Israel still has to try, and if that doesn't work, we'd go for an interim agreement, and then we'd act independently, he said. People think independent means unilateral. It's not unilateral. It's independent and coordinated with the Americans and the Arabs. And once the Palestinians understand that time is not in their favor, then they don't have a veto on the proceedings. I assess that they will return to the peace process, Yadlin said. He stressed that that would not mean acting unilaterally as Israel did in the 2005 disengagement, which saw the painful eviction of all settlements and military posts from the Gaza Strip, in which many in Israel see as a failed policy that gave rise to the current unrest in the Palestinian enclave. As opposed to the disengagement, security would remain in Israel's hands. We would not leave the entire area. Settlements would not be broken up, and we would not retreat to the Green Lines. The Green Line. The INSS plan says, referring to the pre-1967 borders of the Judea and Samaria West Bank. Yadlin says his proposal was possible due to a convergence of events around the world that give Israel better standing than ever in its negotiations with the Palestinians. We should assume that the Blessed Holy One will listen and give us what we ask for. So let's ask for it, he said, jokingly invoking the divine. In the past 2 years, Trump's administration has come out clearly on the side of Israel, moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem and cutting funding to the Palestinian causes, and generally appreciates the Israeli narrative and Israeli interests, Yadlin said. This was in contrast with the previous administration, which Yadlin described as very problematic for Israel. Meanwhile, Arab countries around the Middle East are also increasingly siding with Israel. That would be Mohammed bin Salman, the Prince of Arabia. They're siding with Israel in order to fight Iran, and their decades-long support for the Palestinians is beginning to waver. It's not that it's not important to them, but it's no longer the case that the Palestinians dictate and the Arabs fall in line, Yadlin said. The Arabs are ready to go to places that they weren't willing to go before, end quote. In addition, the Palestinians are slowly realizing that they do not have the power that they once did, according to Yadlin. Quote, what we're trying to explain to the Palestinians is that they listened too closely to John Kerry, who told them that Israel would be lost if it didn't reach an agreement, and so they raised their price to a point that even someone like me, who's associated with the Zionist Union, is not prepared to accept, Yadlin said. Yadlin also downplayed the concerns that Palestinians in the West Bank would restart active, widespread violence against Israel, saying that possibility already exists today without his proposal. I think that they have even less motivation for violence because they're getting a lot out of it. Territory, infrastructure, development, economic incentives, he said. The INSS plan also prepares for the possibility that Trump will not be reelected in 2020, and a new, potentially more antagonistic administration would take its place and rescind the current U.S. president's policies. With this, we expect that there will be support from the administration, support from the U.S. Senate, international support, Arab support, and maybe quiet support from the Palestinians. It would be very difficult to reverse, Yadlin said. So now that's kind of giving us a time frame for this covenant that Daniel spoke about in his prophecy in the Bible, if this is the one. And like I said, their 12th annual international conference is from January 27th to 29th of 2019. So the Associated Press reported on October 11th, which was yesterday, 2018, that there are growing signs Netanyahu may soon call for early elections, possibly as early as next week, when Parliament reconvenes from its summer break. And though Netanyahu hasn't committed yet, conditions appear ripe for him to schedule the vote nearly a year ahead of schedule, after the midterm elections and after the Israeli elections. Then we have a time frame of when this Daniel's peace covenant will be confirmed, if this is actually the one in the Bible that foretells in the last days. So the Major General says that they're not going to wait for the Messiah, that they're going to do it themselves. And I think therein lies the problem, because they're going to do things and not wait upon the king. Isn't that kind of what Israel did when they requested a king instead of the Lord, and they refused the Lord, and they got King Saul as their king? It's very similar. So that didn't work out too well for them. I pray that God would give them wisdom and that the Lord would soon come. God bless everybody. I hope this gives us some idea of when to expect things to start coming down the pike pretty soon here. So let's just read the warning that's in Joel 3 about the dividing of God's land and what's going to happen. And part of Joel 3 matches Matthew 24, which is talking about the time of Jacob's trouble and the tribulation and the areas of Judea that they flee from the mountains of Judea. And this is why. It's because they're going to do this evil deed. Joel 3, for behold, in those days and at that time when I restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem, I will gather all the nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. Then I will enter into judgment with them there on behalf of my people and my inheritance Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations, and they have divided my land. They have also cast lots for my people, traded a boy for a harlot, and sold a girl for wine that they may drink. Now remember, the Messiah is coming like a flash of lightning from the sky. Because in Matthew 24:27, again it says, for just as the lightning comes from the east and flashes even to the west, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. Wherever the body is, there the vultures will gather. But immediately after the tribulation of those days, what days? The days of Jacob's trouble, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn. And they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. And he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet. And they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from the end of the sky to the other. So, this is just like the flood of Noah, that the righteous remnant was saved in the ark of God. And actually this week is the Torah portion speaking about Noah and the flood. So anyway, both of those are the same and refer to the time of Jacob's trouble, Joel 3 and Matthew 24. As I said in my previous video, the flash of lightning happens first, and then later Yeshua told about that this would be like the days of Noah and the days of Lot. And remember that the angels came and gathered the elect out of the city, and the wicked were left to be destroyed. So that's how it's going to be like in Joel 3. Because they divided God's land, and he said that it's his land and not to divide it. And he gave it as an inheritance to Israel forever. So going against this is going against God. So that's my word for the day. And now we can know that Netanyahu's going to call for elections early, even 1 year earlier than usual. And I think it's because within the next couple of months, between the midterm U.S. elections and Israel's elections, this plan is going to be implemented. So that's the timetable. So we need to be continually watching for the Lord to come and not give up our hope.